Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Kevin Jackson, and I am the Vice President of Account Management for Namogoo. I'm here in Manhattan, and I'll be hosting the Evolve webinar today. We're here with a goal to understand first-time digital shoppers, specifically how to increase conversions and turn them into loyal customers. We have three phenomenal speakers that I'm very excited to be talking to today. And each of them will be covering various topics, including the changes in buying behavior, increasing conversion of the first-time digital shoppers, and long-term loyalty of digital shoppers. One of the things that I want to make sure is that this is an interactive event, and we have questions that are available. If you simply type your question into the GoToWebinar panel, then we'll be able to share those questions when we get to Q&A for each of the individual speakers, and then a Q&A session there at the end. With that, I want to go ahead and turn the presentation over to Marie Driscoll. Marie is the Managing Director of Luxury and Fashion for Coresight Research. Coresight Research helps retail clients accelerate innovation and growth, and they focus on disruption taking place at the intersection of retail and technology. Marie, thank you so much for joining, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting us. I'm going to move ahead and move forward on the screen. Here. Before we talk about the changes in consumer behavior, I just want to remind everyone of where we were when we entered 2020. We had a very strong economy. The macro environment was very strong. GDP was up 4% last year. We entered with the consumer having an unemployment rate of 3.5%. Consumer income was growing at about a little over 3%. So you had a really strong consumer, and 2020 looked like it would be a great year for retail sales. And then you had this exogenous event that came in mid-February, and it's COVID. Now, when that happened and we had the shutdown in mid to late March, you had a severe drop in retail sales because Main Street was closed, and the only essential retailers, groceries, mass merchants, and e-commerce were open. So we saw a shutdown, and as we look to what's going to happen to U.S. discretionary retail sales during the course of 2020 and how it recovers, we see a U-shaped recovery. During the shutdown, non-essential retailers are closed. They are likely to they're beginning to open up now. There's some pent-up demand that is buffered by initial shopper caution. And then we see, as the year progresses, a gradual improvement, but still not to the levels that we were at the end of 2019. In fact, many retailers that we talk to are managing to a holiday season of down 20% or more. But we're looking for relative stability from October onward. So, we've been surveying the consumer on a weekly basis since mid-February, and more than half of U.S. consumers expect to continue to avoid shopping centers. And we're seeing, of these 14 different physical outdoor activities that consumers behave in, 11 of the 14 consumers will continue to avoid, and we see week over week, there's an increase of 5 percentage points of consumers of realizing that physical distancing is becoming a part of the way that we'll be living for the near to intermediate term. We also get, in our latest surveys, we're seeing a mixture of quarantine fatigue offset by a fear of getting sick. So we expect the consumer expects for expects their behavior to be long lasting, 6 months or more. We're seeing that they expect to, specifically their behavior around less physical interaction, as they realize, as the realization hits home that physical distancing will remain important, and they expect there to be fewer visits to public places. And these are the 14 places where consumers will not be frequenting. And shopping centers will have a severe impact. We see the enclosed malls probably experiencing a lengthy delay of traffic patterns through the course of the year. And with shopping in general, consumers still will be shopping less in general outdoors, but they're avoiding malls more frequently. And while they're stuck at home, consumers are shopping more online than ever before. We're seeing it level off at about 2/3, but just under 2/3 of consumers are now buying more online than they have in the past. This is a huge behavioral shift that we think is sticky as consumers become comfortable with buying groceries online, apparel online. You have many first-time shoppers that didn't buy apparel online before, and luxury shoppers that shop luxury department stores that are now shopping those venues on their e-commerce sites. So, and we're seeing, and this expectation is that the consumers will keep this changed way of life for a while in lieu of really a vaccine. Sorry, I went the wrong direction, forgive me. And here we see that consumers are buying more apparel, about 25% more. Consumers that are buying more online are now buying more apparel online, and they're leveling off their purchases of household products. And that's probably because of all the stockpiling that they did a month or two ago. So they're going to their pantries and taking the cleansers that they need, and apparel and beauty are leveling off at about 18% for beauty and 24% for apparel, and those are increases. And when we look at the consumer in general, not just the consumer that's increasing their online spend, but we look at consumers in general, we see that the apparel category has jumped from 14% a week ago to 16%. So consumers in general are starting to migrate back to apparel. Whereas with the onset of COVID, consumers were really not looking at apparel. They were concerned with the essential needs of their health care, the food that they needed, and the personal goods and the cleaning products. Just today, we saw a report that Adobe reported a 34% increase in apparel online shopping, and that was in tandem with a significant drop in apparel prices. So apparel is deflationary at the moment, and more deflationary than normal because of the amount of inventory that's locked up in physical stores. But there's a big increase in apparel shopping, and we expect that to be sticky. There's always a place for the consumer to go for assisted selling and appointment selling in physical locations, but we believe the consumer is going to be reluctant to frequent physical shopping locations for the near and intermediate term. And many consumers said that they would be waiting up to 6 months, which goes into the holiday period, before their shopping patterns return to normal. And here we have a look at consumers' intentions for whether they're shopping more online and less in stores. And about 20% of consumers say that they will be shopping less in general, but 30% expect to be shopping more online. So we see the COVID virus as accelerating the rate of online adoption for grocery, apparel, for luxury, categories that are. Apparel certainly has been growing online for a number of years, but for many brands, the penetration is between 10 to 30%. And this year will be another double-digit year of online growth, regardless of what happens for overall retail sales. So with that, if you have any questions for me.
Thank you, Maria. That was great. One question I had is, you mentioned the vaccine, and when you think about the consumer and returning to normal, what other factors or variables do you take into consideration?
So the vaccine is important because if there was a vaccine today, and you felt completely safe to interact physically, you'd be back on Main Street. You'd be eating at restaurants. You'd be shopping in stores. You'd be flying to Paris. You'd be doing so many of the things, that going to museums, etc. Without a vaccine, and that doesn't seem to be on the near-term horizon, the consumer is really balancing the desire to get out and do things that were part of their normal lifestyle with the fact that they could get sick and ill and make others sick and ill. And so that's precluding the consumer. At the same time, many of us are working from home, and we're not going to the office. You know, the unemployment rate has gone from 3.5% in February to 14.7% in April. And so as consumers are concerned about the uncertainty of COVID and a cure. So will they go back to work? Do they still have a job? What does their personal finances look like? What is their job security? All those things impact the way the consumer spends. So we look at all of that. So we look at the macro picture for the consumer. What does their income level look like? What's their sentiment? What's the unemployment rate? What is the prices of a number of goods? I mean, the good news is the gas is very cheap. A lot of products have come down in price. So the consumer may have the wherewithal to shop. Do they have the mindset to shop? That's a question. But we are seeing that consumers are staying at home. They're shopping. They're fixing their house. We're seeing an uptick in spending on the home, and online spending for apparel is growing because consumers are getting comfortable with that venue.
Just to remind everybody to feel free to add questions to the thread, and I'll share them with the participants as well. And it's interesting, Marie, that you call out the home piece. Being in Manhattan in my apartment, I think that's one of the purchases that I've made is lighting and artwork, just to be able to nest in my space. Is there any way to forecast other categories that will either show growth in the shorter or long term, or are there any categories that you think stand out? Obviously, travel's been impacted. Apparel, as one of our retail partners shared, people aren't necessarily buying outfits if they don't have a place to wear them. Are there any industries or sectors that you see coming back stronger for any particular reason?
Right. So, you know, I just read this morning, I went back and reread the Target announcement at the end of the end of April, and their digital online was up 100% in March, and it was up like 275% in April through April 23rd. I mean, online is growing incredibly. And apparel may not seem like it's growing if you have huge discounts in prices, right? If
Yeah.
according to the Adobe release today, online apparel pricing was down 12%. So if apparel pricing is down 12%, that's significant, and it may not look like a top line growth, but yet you're getting unit growth. And I mean, with the stores closing and probably about 80% of apparel sales occurring in brick and mortar, there's a lot of product that is in store and was en route that retailers are trying to move from inventory. They're trying to eliminate their inventory. And you know, the thing about fashion is fashion decreases in value very rapidly. So if you have staple goods, they hold their value, but fashion doesn't hold its value very long. We see that, you know, earrings and jewelry, things from the neck up, tops are doing well. Definite comfort wear, leisure wear, that's doing well. The longer people stay at home, the more they, like, to your point, think about, do I want a new sofa? How can I arrange my house to you know, to have it be multitasking so that you can work from home and live in home? We're seeing interest in the food category and in old line toys like board games.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, Twitter's announcement that they were moving to remote workplace, and one of the budget items they've allocated is $1,000 per employee for work at home supplies. And then in the apparel category, kind of a joke, but with as much time as people are spending at home, you wonder, with adjusting waistlines, what net purchases will be taking place in the near future. But all of this is important to understand for sure. I know one thing that some of our retail partners shared is the ability to leverage retail locations for warehousing, or the way that they're shifting their operations to meet this type of demand. So all extremely fascinating trends to see emerging as we come out of the first phase of the COVID crisis. So thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect. Our next presenter is Tal Rotman. Tal is the Vice President of Business Development here at Namogoo, and we're excited to hear from him. He'll be speaking specifically to how to increase revenues from first-time digital shoppers. Welcome, Tal, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Kevin. And with reference to the expanding waistline, I certainly am one of those who will be doing some shopping in the coming months. Thanks, everyone, for your time. I really appreciate it. What I'd like to walk us through today is a little bit about some of the research that Namogoo's done in the last few months, specifically deriving from a recently conducted consumer survey, which we recently received data from, as well as across our over 150 brands globally, session data, which amounts to billions of sessions weekly, which has given us some very interesting insights, which I'd like to share with you all today. So the first insight that we found to be fascinating is the significant spike in first-time shoppers. I think it stands to reason for a lot of us that we would see that. Many people who haven't, been spending online at all are coming into the market and experiencing e-commerce for the first time. Beyond that, we're also seeing a huge spike in terms of increase in online shopping. And that is much beyond our expectations. I think we'd all expect there to be an increase, but the dollar values are very, very significant. Now, in terms of the specific sectors that we're seeing, or the product sets, I think we'd all expect both food and non-food items from grocery to be a significant driver of those increases that we saw. But what we're finding to be very interesting, beyond the joke with regards to apparel, we're also seeing overall, in terms of consumer electronics, household items, personal care, beauty, and even gifts. Really, all of those are increasing. And actually, in totality, if we look at the non-grocery, we're seeing an almost equivalent amount of increase in terms of the consumer spend. And this is, really fascinating to us in terms of the e-commerce spend. It's something that we're always keeping track of and reporting some very interesting data. The other interesting things is, when we look at those non-essential items, we're also seeing an increase in terms of the overall spend. Nearly 40% or over 40% actually is actually amounting to over $100 of more of monthly spend, and that's a significant change as well with regards to, specifically with regards to first-time shoppers. We're seeing a lot of spend, and they're not dipping their toes into the e-commerce market. They're going full bore into their e-commerce spend, and that's something that as those involved in the e-commerce retail market, we're all of course happy to see. The other takeaway that we found to be really interesting is that we're all aware and familiar with the fact that price would be a key determinant in the decision making that our online customers are making. But we're also still seeing both brand and delivery being impactful. We know that the decisions that retailers are making with regards to their logistics are key, and those who've prepared well are certainly reaping the benefits today, and those that are struggling with regards to their logistics capability are certainly impacted when it comes to our customers' decision making. The other side, though, is that brand is still very significant when it comes to the decision making. Consumers are still making decisions based on their brand familiarity, their brand loyalty, and they want to be sure that they still have a relationship with those brands. So, when we, in totality, we see that to be almost as important, both brand and expedient delivery being just as important almost as price when it comes to decision making. The last determinant when it comes to decision making really is about whether those first-time shoppers are easily distracted. This is specifically with regards to what Namogoo is helping retailers avoid. If you're a first-time shopper, you may not be familiar with the e-commerce experience, and if you see an advertisement from a competitive product, for example, would it be distracting? Well, to many of those first-time shoppers, it would, and across the board, it certainly is going to probably affect their experience. There is very few of those consumers who wouldn't be distracted by an advertisement, and that's where Namogoo comes to play. The first-time visitor is not ready to experience a distracting advertisement, whether it's from competitive brands for whom they have affinity, or it could be an experience which they don't really want to see. It could be something perhaps even salacious, or a product set that they're not expecting to see. And then they start to lose some trust in the brand. There's brand equity issues and loyalty issues, and this is something that we're definitely seeing from our data. Thank you, Kevin, and thank you everyone for your time.
No, thank you, Tal. It's interesting to think about. I know some of these first-time shoppers are starting to go online because of a lack of choice and just the reality of the situation. One of my friends and I were talking about how she had placed a grocery order for her mother because she's at an age that she could possibly be at risk. And her mom told her that she wanted to go ahead and go to the store because she just wanted to browse the aisles. So there's still a little bit of conflict and adjustment that has to take place there. With all the money that brands are putting into acquisition cost, it's such a ripe opportunity for this engagement with this new consumer. So to your point, we want to make sure that that experience is as optimized as it possibly can be, and there's no sort of interference in that engagement with the consumer. You mentioned some interesting trends, and obviously, like that example, the first-time shoppers are pretty special for this specific period of time. Are there any other traits that you've noticed that stand out to these first-time shoppers?
The other interesting thing that we're seeing is, I mean, this really stands to reason that those shoppers are not engaging in-app, right? They're not downloading native apps the retailers are providing. Certainly, they may be ripe for that in the future, but at the moment, those first-time shoppers are engaging web only, and that that is a trend that we expect to see continue. To be honest, as we have been monitoring this for the past few months, that trend has stayed consistent as well.
No, that's an interesting trend, especially given the amount of time and investment that our partners put in those apps and the way to engage with consumers through them, primarily because they can control so much of that experience through the app, making another point to ensure the web experience is optimized for what the consumers are looking for.
Just as much as it is on app, you're right, absolutely.
Yeah. No, Tal, this was great, and we really appreciate the perspective. The research that the team has done helps us all adapt to the changing environment and take advantage of the opportunity to interact with consumers that are facing changes each and every day, and our ability to change with them and be a partner with that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Our next presenter is coming from Israel, and her name is Marina Shapira. Marina is the head of behavioral research for Quantum Metric, and Quantum Metric is a platform for continuous product design. They're one of our partners, and we integrate with them in order to provide our joint customers additional insights and value. Marina is going to be sharing with us a little bit about long-term loyalty of those first-time customers and how to keep them engaged with the brand. Welcome, Marina, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I'm delighted to be here, and let's jump right in. All right, so I think that it's very important for us to understand the actual browsing behavior of those new first-time customers, because we will never have another chance to make a really good first impression on all of those new customers. And we know from our research that the first-time visit has a measurable and predictable impact on their likelihood for a return visit, and as a result, of course, on building some loyalty. And this is particularly true during COVID because of the way our memory actually works. So we remember much more vividly what happened during peak experience, also what happens at the end of the experience, but we're going to focus on the peak experience. So for example, this is why many of us, most of us probably remember exactly what we were doing when we heard about 9/11, for example. And COVID is like this big peak experience that we're all going through. And what's unique about it is that we completely depend on digital channels to satisfy our most basic needs, right? So if a brand fails us during this time, and doesn't help us get those groceries or those essential products that we need, we are much more likely to remember that going forward, and this will impact our future interactions with this brand. And also vice versa, if the experience is positive, then the impact is going to be more positive than in normal days, right? So this situation is a great opportunity, but also a threat for digital companies if they don't adapt. And for this reason, we really focus during this crisis on researching the behavior of new visitors. And we look at over 60 brands of retail, so it's millions and millions of actual sessions of visitors on websites. They're anonymized and also objective, right? Because these are the actual data from their sessions. So one thing that we measure and we focus a lot on is actually frustration, customer frustration. So what we're seeing, unfortunately, is that customer frustration is on the rise during lockdown. It grew almost 30% month over month, so from March 2020 to April 2020, and it's also higher compared to 2019. So if you guys are wondering how do we measure frustration, so these would be repeated interactions of customers with elements on the page that don't respond. So let's say you're clicking repeatedly with this kind of rage on an inactive place order button. So this is frustration. And we asked ourselves, we were so curious to understand why frustration is on the rise. Why is this happening? And the reason for that, unfortunately, again, is that we see a correlation with increased error rate among new visitors. And those errors come from problems in guest checkouts that are much more lengthy. They take more time, they have more fields, and that's why there are more errors there. There's also an influx in traffic that makes things slow down, and also sign-up flows. Overall, we see more errors in search and inventory issues. So all of these things drive frustration up. And when I saw this, I was also very curious to see, okay, so is this frustration actually going to make customers leave? Are they going to abandon, or maybe they're going to just power through those sessions? And unfortunately, again, we see that indeed a very high correlation, as you see in this line, between abandoned cart rates and frustration. So customers know exactly what they need. They need those essential products, and if a brand is not delivering and delivering quickly, then they're just going to flock to a competitor, right? We're in retail. There's so many competitors. There are hardly any monopolies. So it's not even an issue to just jump on a competitor and try your luck there, right? So to provide a good experience now during COVID, we really need to accommodate for those changing needs in customers, and especially their very goal-oriented behavior. And also another topic is urgency. That urgency in shopping, the panic shopping that we saw in stores in February. So what's happening online with regards to this urgency? So when we talk about shopping urgency, we saw a huge influx in urgency in March 2020. A lot of signs that customers are panic shopping, and this is a way to mitigate our own stress and anxiety, right? When we face so much uncertainty, one way to take back some of that control is to stock up on products and make sure that at least what I can control, I am controlling it. And that's why we saw such a huge uptick in essential products in March 2020. So we were so curious to know, okay, so what's happening in April? What's happening during lockdown? And what we see overall, and I'm going to show you the exact data points, but overall we're seeing that it's attenuating. That strong urgency is still stronger than in 2019, but it's weakening compared to March of 2020. So let's look at some data here. In this chart, we're going to see kind of go from top of funnel, overall general engagement, all the way to checkout completion. So we see that in general, in retail, customers are browsing less. Their site engagement time is lower compared to last year, and this is this gray bar here. But so it's faster than normal, but it's attenuating compared to March 2020, which is this month over month, the yellow bar here. And then what we see next when it comes to product selection, we saw very fast product selection flows in March compared to last year. So people are looking at less pages before they select the product. They add to cart much faster. They have overall less clicks until they select the product. And so compared to year over year, compared to last year in April, so still there's urgency, but as we see here in the yellow bar, it is attenuating. Same goes for checkout completion time. Still much faster. People are very goal-oriented. They breeze through those checkouts as fast as possible because they're also afraid that inventory is going to run out, right? We're seeing those behaviors also in events like Black Friday, right? A lot of urgency, but it's attenuating. And as a kind of just to sum this up, what I'm hoping is that this shows that maybe some of the anxiety is slowing down. That is kind of a proxy to how anxious we are. So hopefully we're starting to get some more certainty and control back in our hands as much as possible. So what can we do? What can we do to optimize this experience? So I'm going to talk about two levels. One is, of course, how to improve the first session quality, right? Never have a second chance to make a first impression. And then I'm going to talk about what we can do above and beyond the session in order to improve and increase loyalty. So the first thing that we want to do is to pay attention to those flows, to the first checkout, first sign up, customer sign up flow and guest checkout, because we see a lot of errors there, and these flows are taking too much time right now. We want to change the way we offer products to customers and help them select them really quickly, because we see that speed is very important right now, and the seasonality is completely changed, right? So people are shopping for different products like we just heard, and we want to be able to customers need to find them as quick as possible. So surface them on the homepage, in search suggestions, in the navigation, wherever possible. Show them those very relevant and needed products. Another important part is that we see a lot of errors and very cumbersome flows of buy online, pick up in store, in short, BOPIS. And just lack of clarity and transparency around shipping. This is so important, like Tal told us. Customers must know when the item is going to arrive to me, right? They completely depend on those items arriving. So paying a lot of attention to this BOPIS flow, which for many companies is the very first time they're even building that flow. So they're moving very fast with agility, they're adapting, which is great. But to impress a customer in the first time, it has to be flawless. And lastly, we want to reduce information overload and distractions. As it is, we're really inundated with so much information coming at us from different directions all the time. And whenever we're overwhelmed, it's very difficult to make a decision. And when you're buying something, it's a decision. There's a lot of small decisions along the way. So to streamline that, we want to give customers a peaceful experience as much as possible in terms of visual stimuli on websites. So now we're getting into the exciting phase of how to increase loyalty. So something that we know from our machine learning predictive modeling of loyalty is that the key to loyalty is the pattern of the behavior. It is more important than how much customers spend overall, right? So if a customer made their first purchase or even the first visit, the top imperative is bring them back. Even if they don't buy, just bring them back. And the old way, let's say pre-COVID, to bring customers back is probably not going to work right now, because we know from studies that in isolation, they actually did that study where counselors talked to people in isolation. One group discussed their problems, and the other group discussed things that they were intrinsically motivated about, things they were really passionate about. And that group had an increase in well-being. So a way that we can leverage this in digital is really to tie the use of a product with something that relates to a customer's core values. So for example, Shopify, Expensify and Spotify, very similar names, they both link between just your regular use, just keep using the product the way you were, but as you do this, we are donating to charity. So this is a great way to connect to something that is intrinsically motivating. And when we act from intrinsic motivation and we feel that we do good, then we also feel that it's, we have more control, and it's out of true volition, which are great for well-being right now. And there are other creative ways to do this also for companies that can't necessarily donate, right? And lastly, we need to think about the call to actions that we use in retargeting emails, for example. So ways that we try to encourage engagement. Oftentimes, I must admit, we rely on things like fear of missing out, urgency, social comparison. If you don't click this button, you're not the cool kid on the block, or only two left at this price. And these messages are not the right messages at this time, right? When we face life's fragility, we seek connectedness, we seek togetherness, and we don't want to be fighting or to feel that we're isolated. So that's why many companies created hashtags that are completely external to the product, like clapping at the same time for first responders, just to create this connection. Prioritize connection over comparison or competition. And what I really want to leave you with is that loyalty is truly shaped between the visits, right? The experience on your website, it's important, but most of the time people don't use your website. And what we need to be striving for is that the brand is top of mind for customers in a positive way, even when they're outside of your website. So all of these small interactions, like nudging for connection through hashtags, and just the way that brands present themselves to the world and their core identity, is going to play a huge role in how customers perceive brands going forward and on their long-term loyalty. So that is what I have for now.
That's great, Marina. And it's fascinating that you ended with that and began with the frustration. I talked about nesting in my apartment. I've lived here for 2.5 years, and a lot of my walls have been completely blank. And so two of the purchases that I've made have been from the same e-com store of different prints. And when I ordered the first one, I was thrilled with the experience. The team was great, even in the midst of all the challenges with shipping and everything else. So I went ahead and ordered another print from the same store, and it was the offline experience that has frustrated me with them, because they have sent me several cart abandonment emails when I've actually completed the purchase. And
Wow.
being involved in technology, both for e-commerce and retail, I think I probably have a higher bar than some consumers. But at the same time, it made me feel like they didn't either know who I was or weren't really connecting me to the purchases that I was either trying to make or had made. So even in my own last week experience, I can share that frustration, both with not necessarily what the online experience was, but the offline experience later on, communicating with the brand. So. And I think knowing the consumer is so important. Namogoo announced an acquisition of Personally, a company that's focused on knowing consumers and being able to offer specific opportunities for them through coupons and discounting and other things. And so much of it is about knowing consumers, measuring that behavior, being able to present specific experiences. And I wonder, we talk so much about the metrics that are core to e-com success. How do you think we should, or how are you measuring if customers are moving towards loyalty and developing that affinity towards a specific brand?
Right, it's a great question. So one metric that is very useful to do that, I think, is it doesn't have a great name. It's called RFM, and it stands for recency, frequency, and monetary. And I know it's quite familiar, but it's actually very underused. And what the beauty of this metric is that it ties the pattern of behavior that we see is so important with the monetary impact. So it's almost like it resembles customer lifetime value, but it's not predictive. So any business can calculate it. You don't need any machine learning. And basically, you're looking at how frequent those purchases are and what is the tenure. That's the recency. How far in the past the customer started purchasing with you. And when you combine those, you can actually, pull the different levers. You can say, oh, this customer actually see that the frequency is dropping of their visits. So, maybe I need to retarget them in a different way. And you can also segment them in your analytics by their RFM score, which is also very helpful. You can even, look at their sessions based on RFM and then try to decode how a very loyal customer that has a high RFM score is behaving on my website compared to those who are lower, and try to move more customers into that loyal segment.
Nice. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, to your point, something on the RFM piece, it may be something that we haven't had as much of a priority on, but in the reality, I don't think we can assume that anything is the same these days. So really looking at everything with a fresh set of eyes is so important, because it is such a unique opportunity to meet these consumers where they are. So thank you for everything you shared.
Thank you.
I'll ask the other presenters to go ahead and turn on their cameras. We're going to do a little bit of a Q&A session with the remaining part of our time. Obviously, we want to have engagement from all the people that are dialed in online. So if you have questions, again, feel free to send them through the messaging app, and we will share them with the presenters. If you have a general question or a specific one for anyone in particular, please let us know. Tal, I'll go ahead and start with you. One question. In terms of what industries are going to be coming online faster than others, we've talked a little bit about the trends in some so far. Are there any particular industries that you see having a quicker recovery than others?
In terms of the recovery, the non-grocery, we're definitely seeing a significant uptick in terms of apparel, beauty, and gifts. I think specifically in May, we've seen a significant increase, and that's probably correlated to Mother's Day for sure. And we're definitely expecting here in the US a spike with regards to Memorial Day. I think a lot of it may also have to do with, birthdays. There's a lot of folks, unfortunately, that are celebrating their birthdays at home. I myself, Marina talked about FOMO. I suffered from fear of not buying enough with my wife most recently, and not being in shop to buy her the gifts. I just went crazy and bought so many gifts online. So I think we're all experiencing a little bit of that as well.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Marie, for you, I'm curious, you talking about fashion, luxury apparel, and beauty, or even non-essential services according to the government. And so they're phasing their reopenings in different regions of the countries, and some may be slower than others. What kind of trajectory do you see for these categories as Main Street starts to reopen?
So we see pent-up demand first, right? There's some product that obviously we've seen growth in e-commerce for luxury and apparel online, but there isn't an aspect to these brands that is physical. And for luxury has been a real late adopter to e-commerce because they felt so strongly that part of the brand experience was physical. Well, thank goodness in the last few years, a lot of luxury brands have brought a portion of their assortment online so that their customers could access and look and think. In our conversations with luxury clients, we've suggested not pushing a sale, but to Marina's point, being empathetic, understanding the consumer where they are, and developing loyalty, because the consumers have a relationship with brands, and if you are communicating with them in the sense that you're going through this period, which is very harrowing. We don't know what to expect. Every day is the same, except we don't know what to expect tomorrow, right? So we think that it's the opportunity to deepen your relationship with the consumer, and when they're ready to shop, they'll shop. Luxury probably will be down 20 to 30% this year, partly because the stores have been closed, partly because there isn't the international travel. And international travel is so important for people to go to various destinations, treat themselves with a luxury purchase, bring it home, and that becomes part of their entire holiday experience. And then there's just the sense that what's happening to the consumer's wallet? Do they have the wherewithal and the inclination to spend on luxury? So we think there is pent-up demand, and that will happen, but then it'll back off a little bit, and we'll see growth increasing as the year continues. But next year is when you'll see, this year is really a wash for luxury. That doesn't mean it's a wash for luxury online. It just means like the overall category, and so much of that is really driven on the lack of mobility, the lack of international shopping, and then stores closed.
For sure. And part of that, stores being closed, I think, as I consider the trends that I've heard people talk about, health and beauty, you hear a lot of purchases around fitness.
Right.
Gyms are closed. In terms of beauty, you hear a lot of people having to adapt to a reality where the salon's not open or the barber's not open. I, of course, did my hair for today's presentation, but a lot of people need to adapt in different ways. And all of those things, like you said, may come back quickly in some sense, and then continue to shift throughout the rest of the year.
Yeah.
Marina, oh, sorry, Marie, what were you saying?
No, I was just going to say gradual incline.
And to continue to remember that we're the very beginning of this in a lot of ways, that this is something that's going to continue to evolve as the situation evolves, as different regions lead in other ways. And we're having to anticipate things that we don't necessarily know what will happen next. And to that point, Marina, you made a lot of great points about that consumer experience and the focus that brands should be making around attaching loyalty. I'm curious, from your perspective, brands are dealing oftentimes with limited budget, given the shutdown of retail and the shift to digital. So I know on the account management side, a lot of the conversation I hear is around cash flow management and prioritizing certain things. I'm curious from your perspective, if you were in the brand seat making decisions on how to prioritize that last dollar to spend, are there any things that you would focus on from an investment standpoint?
Yeah, great question. I think that I will focus on, first of all, on creating this single source of truth around where my customer data is coming from, because what we're seeing when we work with enterprises, there are many times they're held up by just data silos. This team thinks one thing and the other team just doesn't agree, and they can't make progress. And we know that when customers work in alignment, they see a higher ROI on their customer data insights, as high as up as 15%. So it's very important everybody look at the same data, and then it's very easy to prioritize it. And once everybody knows kind of what's a North Star, what's the goal, what are the fixes that we're going to implement, and there's a shared roadmap, and all the cross-disciplinary teams are working together, I would really focus on that sort of cross-disciplinary, agile teams that are looking at one kind of data source about their customers and advancing that forward through really rapid changes. It's kind of this time where there's not too much time for testing. Just have to adapt, implement really quickly, and fix it on the go.
Definitely. No, I think from our standpoint, and the way that we've evolved as a platform, is that's been such a key focus, is struggling to connect the CDP to the merchandising tools to the analytics tools and measuring cost per conversion or cost per click, all those different things. You want to be able to attach ROI, and you want to be able to attach engagement and loyalty to those things. And it's important for all those sources of information to be able to communicate together. So that makes a lot of sense.
In real time. Yeah.
So we're coming to the end of the webinar, and I want to thank first and foremost the team that has put this together on the Namogoo side. So thank you so much for the energy and effort to bring everyone here together. Thank you especially for all of those that have signed in and been listening to this conversation. We appreciate you being here, and please feel free to follow up with us if there's anything that we could provide or any questions we can answer. Marie, Tal, Marina, thank you so much for your content, for the engaging way that you presented everything, and for the many things that I think we can all take back and consider in terms of how we move forward throughout this time that's filled with uncertainty, but also opportunity. We will be sharing all of this through a recording to those of you that have attended. And look forward to hearing from everyone soon. So thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.